you for joining today. Today we've got Lynn. Wait, Lynn, what is it? Pietryga?
Pietryga, very close.
Pietryga. I know I've asked you that before. It's just sometimes I'm just lousy with names. Well, I'm always lousy with names, but thank you for your patience with me on that. So today we have Lynn Pietryga, co-leading today in CS office hours. And the topic is first in CSM, first in CS leader. And while it may sound it's specific to being just a topic that applies to first in CSMs and CS leaders, because that's what the name of it is, it really, some of the things we'll be talking about really helps and applies to everyone, whether when it's first in, when you're getting into your role, or just generally how to juggle and prioritize and make sense of a always changing, fast-paced world. So, and we kind of all live there usually. So, oh yes, let's put in our LinkedIn URLs, everybody. And let's see. The other thing that I just want to remind everybody is it Marianne or Sharuk who's putting over in the chat all the different?
That's me.
Okay, Sharuk is putting over in the chat all the different links you need today. If you haven't signed up for the LinkedIn page, you want to do that. That's where you're going to see the schedule and times of all the different topics that are coming up. If you haven't signed up for the Slack community, it's a great idea to do that. We've added some things like geo, anything that starts with geo is different areas. We have one for Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, San Francisco Bay Area, Toronto, Washington, DC area. If your area, like Hawaii, doesn't exist there yet. Oh, Bowden, you wanted me to add one in for APAC. I can add that. So then, that's another area where you guys, can kind of connect regionally as well. And then we'll also have a session August 18th that'll be specifically around interviewing, but we have a channel called Mock Interviews. If people want to practice doing interviews, you should join that. If you don't want to help with someone practice interviews, or if you don't want to practice interviews, that channel is not for you. But if you want to practice interviewing, or you want to help someone else to practice interviewing, that channel is for you. Also on the 18th, we'll be talking about interviews specifically. And there's a lot of other things. So just keep in mind that if you go to add channels, that's where you'll be able to browse and see more channels. All right. If you today, though, go to CSOH session resources and ideas, that's a little bit shorter of a name. I did update the name a little bit shorter. That's where you're going to see for today's topic. You'll see the links in there as well. So if you didn't catch them in the chat, you can find them in the Slack. All right, that's opening. That's a long intro, but I want to be sure everybody had that information. Okay, so let me just share for a second a slide, because I have been transformed into creating just a few slides, just a few, so that we have a place for let me just move you back all over so I can see you again. Just what the topic is and resources and our overview, that sort of thing. So first in CSM, first in CS leader. This I love. This is Lynn's. Lynn, do you want to just share briefly?
Yeah, I'm guessing a lot of you in customer success know this meme, recognize this meme. This is one of my favorites. Jan had never seen this before. The little guy on the left is actually a little Funko doll of the This Is Fine dog that I have on my bookshelf. I embrace this mentality all the time, and I'm sure most of you in customer success do, whether that fire is because of product changes or bugs or just never ending priorities shifting in your everyday life as a CSM or CS leader. So yeah, this is something that I absolutely love. And I think it's one of the ways to kind of show resilience in terms of customer success and how you sort of have to deal with everything and put on that great face for customers. So I personally love this meme.
Yeah, and I had seen the meme before. I have not seen the doll. you definitely have embraced this, but it absolutely resonates. Certainly when you're in startup life or first in CSM, CS leader. What I wanted to just first very quickly go past is just, these are all the potential roles you're filling when you're first in, and that you could do all of these things, right? You could do onboarding, support, CS ops, you end up being, some form or some fashion of a leader. There's, customer marketing, customer education, customer advocacy, customer adoption, voice of the customer, expansion and renewals, blah, 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 your book of business, you name it. This is all of the CS stuff that really happens post sales, right? These are all the motions that happen once somebody signs on the dotted line. Technically, you might end up doing all of that. You can't physically or possibly do all of that, so you have to choose. But then oftentimes too, especially in an early stage startup, you end up doing some non-CSM types of things, like, well, we only have a part-time, CFO or a part-time, billing person, and they can't handle all the accounts receivable and the billing questions. So that's you. And all of a sudden, like, you're handling all kinds of things. Or we're still building that. So until product and engineering builds that, we need you to do the following 12 steps and help, the customer lead through that. So there's things like that that happen. That said, and I imagine, like, I guess put in the chat if any of this resonates. How many people right now are kind of doing any of the first in roles or have done it in the past and this sort of resonates? Thank you, Christine, you're laughing. I get that. Claire, everything that's going on. Yeah, that's you. Yep, Sean. Okay, I mean, it certainly resonates with me. Oh, absolutely. Fundraising and board prep. Yeah, Jillian, did you want to speak to that, or you're just saying, yes, that's me too?
Oh, yeah, I was just raising my hand. Yeah.
Sort of like, help. Yeah. Awesome. Yep. Everybody's seeing that. and you're selling Girl Scout cookies too. Nice. Okay. So part of why I thought it'd be great for Lynn to join in is because Lynn has done almost, like all of these roles I just sort of outlined here. Lynn has almost done all of them, and I can relate to that. I've done a lot of them too, but Lynn has done all of them, and then she became sort of that first in CSM/CS leader, and she'll talk through some of that. But Lynn, maybe you can just walk us through briefly all the different types of CS roles, all the different types of like onboarding and sales and support roles, CS ops. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions here, just to kind of draw out a few more things like that, just what that journey's looked like.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely been all of the things like you just mentioned, right? So I think for customer success, it's been starting with a very large book of business with low touch. So it's been, 150, 200 customers. I've also done the enterprise, so having a much smaller book of business that's much more hands-on. I've led different teams. So I've led a team of named customer success managers. I've also led a scaled pooled customer success model. And then also moved more into what I'm doing now, which is obviously everything. But even before that, I worked in what I consider sort of sales support roles, onboarding and implementation roles for major projects. I have a master's in business, specifically in project management. So I consider myself very organized and efficient when it comes to planning and structuring some of these things out. So definitely, again, all of the different pieces have moved in and out of customer success operations as well. So figuring out how to build things with different tools, worked with multiple CRMs, multiple customer success tools, all of the Microsoft and Google suite. So really all across the board there.
And yet you got into this role and something surprised you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call can relate to this. Customer success is very different every single place you go. So it's really going to depend on the role and the environment that you're in and what that looks like. So I think what I'm doing, and I think especially one of the things I mentioned when I went from a smaller company, I called it going back in time, because you've had all of this great information, this knowledge about what works, how to really get things done. So maybe you've had a team, maybe you've had a customer success tool. In my last role, we had a data science team of multiple people, where now in my current role, we obviously don't have that. We're a team of 12. So for me, it's learning SQL and how to go into our database to pull out the information that I need. It's things like taking for granted a lot of those data points that you have for customers today. A lot of things you pull for logins or certain activities, some of those adoption metrics you probably use, those all exist because a product team has to say, this is something that we want to track within the platform. So, going back to starting a company and really going back, and the company I'm at now is in our seed round, so in pre-series A, which I'll mention in a second, go into more of that later. But really early on, right? So it's figuring out what are those metrics we even want to track, working with the product team to get that into their development cycle, and then being able to use that data in any meaningful way. So it's thinking about how do you have the knowledge of how you can run. You've been there, you maybe know how that works, but you're really back in that crawl phase. And it's having to sort of have that mindset and mentality of where we're at. What are we at today? What are the capabilities? What are my resources? And then being able to make the best of that and move forward from there.
So the other thing I was going to ask you though, is they were starting to look for a first-in CSM, but you didn't come in as a CSM, you came in as a CS leader, and now you're CCO. And still, it's just you. You are the CS team. So you're also very much an IC, an individual contributor. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference and the distinction in that, and how did you have that conversation to create that distinction?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things to think about when you want this type of role, is thinking about what they're actually looking for. So when I applied for this role, I actually had the salesperson at this company, I had worked with him at a previous job, and he had reached out wondering if I knew anyone who'd be interested to join their company. And of course, it sounded like a great opportunity. So I interviewed, but the job posting itself was actually for a CSM. So the posting was for a customer success manager, but also mentioned that they were looking to get someone in who's going to build out a team, build out processes. They had someone part-time that the founders knew that was sort of helping with customers, but that wasn't really their strong point or what they were used to doing, and they didn't want to do it full-time. So I was trying to figure out, who can take on the role of onboarding these new customers as they were starting to really ramp up their sales process. And then as we started talking more, it seemed like a great fit for someone who wanted to come in and eventually actually take over department. So it was something that when I was talking with them, it was not only do we want someone who's going to come in and do the things, but I need you to build the strategy, own customer success, figure out what that means within our organization. And Jan, I know what we've talked to is, my role went from considered that head of customer success. So like you're managing the customer experience, the post sales, to that C-level role, because it truly did become something that was executive level. So a lot of what I've taken on over time, and this could be just based on what the company needs or what your particular skill set is. I was able to start having those conversations where I'm presenting. Someone mentioned, the fundraising board level metrics, having those conversations, being able to speak to forecasting, having your net revenue retention metrics, managing that on a monthly, quarterly basis, and being able to speak to all of those things at that executive level is what eventually moved my role up to that.
You're doing like board presentations and all of sort of having sort of that representing the customer at that executive level, kind of that pretty much.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so less of the kind of day-to-day managing a book of business, but can you speak to, what is our ICP? So what is our ideal customer profile? Which of our customers and segments and industries tend to be the most successful? And how do we filter that back into our marketing team? And really, how does that voice of customer then impact our product? So it really became something that was, not just managing that day-to-day book of business of onboarding, implementing, renewing customers, but all the rest of that list, which is that, customer marketing, voice of customer, how do we tailor that back into our vision and direction of our product as well?
Great. Yeah. And so then in terms of the things that you need to do or know, when you're looking at priorities, market fit, how things change, like what kinds of things do you want to mention around those topics there before we get them out to the breakout sessions?
Yeah, I think one thing, and I know I've talked with several of you in breakout sessions that have been in this position, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that have some thoughts as well, but I think, again, back to customer success is different everywhere. And those founders are going to be at different stages of when they actually hit that pain point and decided to invest in customer success. So some might be early on. I was lucky to have a founding team that really believed in being customer centric and listening to that voice of customer to make sure we're driving that product market fit. There could definitely be other founders out there or early stage companies that maybe are just looking for someone to come in for support. Maybe they just are having a lot of trouble with something and that's what they're looking for. So I think figuring out what actually is the role they're looking for, what are they trying to fill, how customer centric are they? I think also understanding a lot of around startups is understanding where they are and what they're expecting. What I mean by that is their rounds of funding. So a seed round versus that, A or B is going to be earlier on in a startup's life. There's going to be maybe a higher amount of risk. Maybe they haven't figured about enough stuff out at that point versus, later stage startups are going to be maybe a little bit more, less risky for you as well. But I think figuring out where are they in their stages? What are their expectations? Some questions I've learned to ask of startups is understanding, I think this came up in at earlier office hours around financials, but understanding their runway. How long does this company have money for in terms of what do we need to maintain for our customers? I think also understanding what founders think of their exit. So are these founders expecting to sell this company? Are they thinking to go public in 10 years? I think there's a lot of things that go into joining a startup that's not necessarily just customer success based, but making sure it's a good fit for you. I think there's a lot to learn about just startup companies and startup culture. If it's not something that you've been really involved in before, there's a ton of stuff to learn about that, and if that is really a good fit.
And when you're working at the executive level, are you also then giving input in terms of what the ideal customer profile is and that sort of thing, and then as well then working with the whole book of business as you're sort of working out that product market fit? I think that was a question that was in the chat at some point.
Yeah, I mean, like I have a regular meeting with our marketing team. We actually have a go-to-market meeting, which is customer success, sales, and marketing. We actually recently invited our product team as well, just to talk through, what are the pressures we're hearing from the competitive market? What are renewals that might be at risk because of product things that we might need to address? But really figuring out how do we all work together? Which are, again, most successful customers? What stories can I tell about who renewed, who got value? And then my marketing team wants to get that information into case studies, but also then can tailor a lot of our filters for, outreach for our sales team. Again, if you're a small sales team, you really do need to focus on, who you can win and understanding that ICP, that ideal customer profile, and who we know and which verticals work well. Spending time and effort on targeting those helps us win more deals.
Awesome. Gary, do you have a comment or a question?
I got a question for Lynn. Like, I understand that sort of you were asked about if you knew anyone, and then you sort of went through the process. But I'm just curious to know what's one great interview question that you asked the founders to sort of know whether that was the right organization for you.
I mean, I think it's one of the pain points, again, within customer success is like, how well do sales and customer success and product work together? That was something I wanted to understand, which was, how do you see those departments working together to move forward as an organization? Especially early on, understanding, what say customer success has. I've worked for companies in which sales really gets all the development resources, really everything that way. And I wanted to make sure that they had an equal voice within the customer vision, as well as input within product, especially early on, and being able to listen and develop that. I think that's also something to think about for joining a really early stage company, is knowing that your founders, this is their baby. They're going to be joining customer calls. They're going to be asking you a lot of questions. Same thing with product. They're going to be wanting to talking to your customers all of the time. So if you are someone who likes to sort of be hands off and own your own book of business by yourself, it's definitely not how that works. Really, everyone wants to interview every customer all the time, especially when you have a smaller number of customers. You're trying to figure out exactly what those indicators are to move in the right direction.
Awesome.
How do you keep control of that, Lynn, so that nobody feels overwhelmed with the number of touches from all of these people all the time?
Yeah, so luckily small team is good and bad for things. I think it is actually really good for having easy communication. Slack channels are amazing to kind of keep everyone up to date with, I need to talk to someone about X, Y, and Z, and we can easily set up calls. When I first started and joined, I was the new person, and my CEO and chief product officer obviously had the relationships before me. So it was almost me taking over a lot of the interviews they had before. But as we signed new customers, it was the other way around, right? Where I was making the introductions, they were joining my monthly calls. So it's really figuring out and keeping those communication lines open in Slack, because we definitely had conversations with my CEO, who's known this company that signed up before I joined. They have a great relationship. He's telling my CMO to just reach out, get a case study together, put a webinar together directly without letting me know. So I think it's figuring out how to just make sure, again, to keep everyone on the same page when those things come up, since we're working on multiple things. And luckily with a small team, I think it's a little bit easier, but I have worked for other companies where CS is saying one thing, sales is reaching out something else, marketing is sending something else, the communications team is sending something else, and all of a sudden there's 4 emails in someone's inbox.
Yeah. And when you try to transition the accounts over from the founders to you, like, can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I know a lot of people who've had challenges with that, where like, especially they're coming in even as the CS leader, not as the CSM. And sometimes you can understand if it's like a lighthouse customer, one of those, early, important customers that you have a close relationship with, it can be hard to, take them too far away from the founder, right? But how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think it's just letting them know that you're hoping that relationship won't change. They were brought in very early, maybe even before the product launched, or we've got customers that when we started, we were a very different company that sold almost a very different product. And they've stuck with us throughout that. And so these are customers that joined to be those early adopters, to partner and drive our innovation. And I think it's just making sure that they know that piece of the relationship is not going to change, even if the person does. So I still want to be there as someone who hears their priorities, who wants to hear the feedback from their users, and how we can implement that in our roadmap. And even there might be something where on a quarterly basis, those are the ones that obviously have our executive teams coming in to join those meetings to still get that face time. So there still is a lot of that relationship, but I think it's, again, just making them feel comfortable where it's not like you no longer have access to the founder, but I'm still going to make sure that your feedback gets to the place that it needs to go. And we're still going to be iterating and providing those updates based on your feedback and your team. And you're not going to be sort of relegated to the side just because you don't have that direct conversation.
Yeah, and I like to sort of say, hey, by the way, if it comes through me, it's going to be incorporated in all the ways you want it to be. If it goes through the CEO first, it may or may not get to me, it may or may not get to anybody else because they're wearing 50 different hats, doing 50 different things. So, you know, help me help you, kind of, yeah. There's
Exactly.
one last question before we go out to breakout rooms and get set up for that. Felicia, I don't know if you wanted to come off mute, but I can go off of what you have here in the chat. She's asking about how you determine what's sort of your initial MVP, you know, in CS to garner support, and what programs, CRM, automations, what kinds of things are essential to build those data stories. Are you, I mean, I know that some things you're still doing is just off of Google Sheets, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you have. And again, that's part of that going back in time. Like I know I've had Gainsight and I've had amazing you know, ways that I've built out automations, and I miss that sometimes. But it's, you know, I think going back to what are things you should know in this type of role is like, what can you build, what can you automate, what can you program? So we have HubSpot here. And so it was a lot of just learning HubSpot. Like I had not used HubSpot workflows before, but figuring out through their, you know, help center, like how do I build a couple things out? There's some great resources online of how people are using HubSpot for onboarding programs, for customer success, which is also one thing I'll just say. There's so many resources out there in every customer success community and Slack communities and, you know, other online communities to find some of these things that people have done a lot of work. And there's definitely, it's a great idea to go out and utilize a lot of those resources, make them your own from there. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of stuff that's out there. But I think figuring out, you know, what are the tools you do have? Again, I have HubSpot, and that is basically my customer success tool. That is how I manage things through tasks. That's where I input my health score. That is where I build my dashboards to manage renewals. It's really where a lot of stuff's in there. And then I have a Google sheet that I've created that is my customer adoption dashboard, where I'm pulling in stuff from our SQL database, and there's some, you know, macros and some formulas in that. So it's really figuring out what are the key things that you can start with and eventually trying to build from there. But really that's all that I have today, which is the Google Suite and HubSpot and our database.
Awesome. And just as we were talking about resources, there is this slide here where we have some links and 3 critical books, I'd say, that you'd want to check out if this is an area you're going into. And then I'll get you ready for the breakout sessions. You're going to do a lightning round of introductions. Part of that is going to be, have you ever been, or would you consider being a first, or are you now a first in CSM or CS leader? And then the discussion questions are here. Does everybody have the Word doc? You have the link for the Word doc? Do you have it open? Are you ready? Are you ready? Yes. All right. I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Yeah. And off we go. How many folks do we have? 38. So I'll do 8 rooms. All right. Oh no, I'll do 10 rooms. Okay. off you go. Gonna give you 15, maybe, yeah, probably 15 minutes. Sorry, folks. We went over on the early part, but 15 minutes, and then I'll bring y'all back. I have a couple apologies. Bowden was exiled to his own alone time group. Sorry, Bowden. And but apparently he's got some really great notes that he jotted down before I finally saw that he needed to be moved into a group. So be sure to check these notes and see what was chatted about and discussed and what kinds of resources might have been shared. That's why we kind of do that, so everybody has some place to share all these notes and capture them. Awesome. What was there, any sort of aha moments or a big takeaway that someone wants to share? Anybody have an aha?
I think for my group, everyone, actually 3 out of the 4 were actually kind of the newest, either co-founding or kind of transition into leadership. And I think I think the secret sauce and the detriment is the collaboration across functional teams, that it's a necessary evil. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to say it more positively, right? So on the one hand, you want to collaborate with them so your customer experience isn't impacted, right, by conflicting or multiple messaging. On the other hand, it really slows down. So I think that was kind of our takeaway. We didn't get a chance to say kind of like how to resolve that, but that was my takeaway from my team. And, 3 out of the 4 of us were actually the early stage leaders.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else experience that? Does that resonate? Questions for Sandy? Not sure what she meant by it.
And I can add, in our group as well, that actually came up was the big disconnect between like a sales and customer success.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out, especially at early stage, what does that mean for sales and what does that mean for customer success, and how do you make it so you're not just throwing the new deal over the fence and moving on, but how do you incentivize and align those two groups a lot better, and not just in early stages, but I think any stage. I'm sure everyone here would nod in agreement in terms of there's probably a lack of perfect alignment between sales and customer success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big, often a big disconnect at every organization, right? Like that's not unique. Anybody find a way to address that? Has anybody felt like, wow, we were able to address this challenge well? Bowden, you want to hold back all the money. Is that what you do?
I discovered though that some of it was maturity. If I have the knowledge I have now around what customer lifecycle can look like, if I had known that when I was in the startup as the only one, that would have drastically altered how I handled that particular kind of situation. But I didn't have that knowledge then. And so it was a cluster.
The things you learn trial by fire.
One thing that we've done is actually bring the salesperson back to talk to the customer and explain to them why we don't have this thing that they said that we have. It's like, you told them. So, we make a plan together before like the call, but still it's like, okay, you got to help us now. Like you got us into this situation. So let's figure it out together.
Nice. Yeah. And always, if you have like the gong recording from when that conversation transpired, sometimes, I found that customers will make things up or misinterpret, right? And you can always kind of, if you have a recording, you kind of go back to it and say, oh, let's talk about that some more. So it's not always on sales. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding, right? When you've seen trends where it is happening, where it's primarily one salesperson, or when it's across the board, everybody's just selling because they have to meet, that money deadline, and they'll sell to anybody at any time. Anybody think about how to address that with the sales team and sometimes with the CEO? Has anybody had that challenge? Gary?
Ultimately, the best way to deal with that is show how much money the company loses as a result of poor sales management.
Yeah.
It takes time. It's a lagging thing.
I was going to say and it can be 12 to 36 months lag depending on the length of a contract. So it's something you've got to call out early, and something that you'll bear a lot later as well. So it's a big challenge.
Jeff had some nice numbers in his LinkedIn post today. Didn't Jan, you saw that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That talked about what all of that could look like with some
Mhm.
fictional numbers.
Yeah, I'll look for that and share that. What were you going to say, Bowden?
I think ideally you want a really, really good long-term relationship with sales, because in my mind, sales and CS are just two halves of one journey, which is the customer journey. So, the relationship starts well before the sale is made, and it still continues through the sale. One thing I like doing with salespeople is working around the concept of customer success stories. So by incentivizing sales to make better sales, we in return in CS give them back better customer success stories, which help them make better future sales. So you build what do they call it, a virtuous cycle or something? It should be a hand-in-hand partnership anyway, mutually beneficial one. So talking about, improved sales equals improved customer success stories, which circles back to improved sales. Generally, that's, as a concept, is going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
Quite often, though, the problem is in startups, since we're speaking about startups here, is that quite often sales and marketing and the executives don't know why people buy the product. It's not that refined yet. In fact, if anybody usually knows for really specific customers, it is customer success and support that have better insight, but for some reason, nobody ever believes them.
There you go.
I don't know. I don't know if that's always the case, because I feel like sometimes the sales teams really have more insight, especially when it comes to like an implementation model that they're very close to, they're very knowledgeable about. The customer's desire, the results that they want, is usually communicated to the sales. So by the time it gets to customer success, we're guessing that based on the way the product is designed, they are using it because of this. And when we see usage, okay, they're using it based on what we've deemed as the fidelity, using it with fidelity, and they're going to get results. But there are these nuances within the customer's like organization, how they're using it, what they're using it for, that we don't always get that information. And I'm speaking from like working with an ed tech company. There's schools, there's all kinds of, teachers abandoning ship, we're trying to help teachers and students, and there's a lot of change in staff and what kinds of technology and security barriers for using online platforms. There are these things that happen that the sales team knows. And so I've made it a point to do, like one thing that I could do is just make sure that I communicate with the sales teams, and I send them a really nice message. I send them an email, and I love this message that I've created for them because it works every time. They get so excited about meeting me and giving me exactly what I want, and they never say no. And I always get these little subtle nuances about the relationship. What do I need to know to help you, support this customer? I could see this is coming up. It seems like you could use some help. I could do it if I had this little bit of information. Are you willing to give me that so I can help you? And they always say yes. And I have 4,000 accounts, and I can tell you that I get this information. And when I get it, then I'm able to be in the mix, but I don't feel like I don't have anything to work with. I know more about the roles. I know more about key people. It's always a warm transfer. And then we get good retention and expansions in that way.
Well, that's amazing, Felicia. I think you need to go and post that email template over in this channel here for everyone to refer to, because everyone will want to know what that magical email
What the magic
looks
words
like.
are.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I can share with you before we head out for the day is think about how you can build a relationship with a sales leader and get them on the same page. That one thing that you can, if you're looking at if they're selling not to, outside of the ideal customer profile, then you can look at that post that Jeff Kuchmarek, I put the link in chat and it's over in the Slack as well, where he really just does the math. And if anytime he shows somebody the math, that often very much resonates. If it doesn't resonate with your sales leader, it's going to resonate with your CEO. And in a startup, the CEO is trying to make certain that they go from series A, B, whatever. So that's really critical information for them, right? So that's one thing, is you want to share with them what the cost is if they're selling to non-ICP. If they're just not setting up for that transfer of information and the transfer of the relationship well, there are ways in which you can build that, and you can talk to them about, where you put data together of here are all the accounts. Let's look at some of these trends of why they didn't transfer well. Let's work together and see if there might be something. Maybe it's just a little tweak. Maybe it's just this little bit of information. Maybe it's this one little thing. It doesn't have to be a big process. Maybe it's a small thing we can do to fix this, but let's work on this together. And if you build that relationship with them, you can oftentimes get them on board, and then you can find ways where then both the sales team and your CS team can get trained up in this process and can get everybody on board with doing that smooth transition. Look, salespeople, they put a lot of their heart and soul and time into it too, right? So they don't want to see that all of their hard work went for naught. Like they want to see, these customers do successfully. It's just they also need to make their month end or quarter end too, right? So there's always that challenge. Any last things that people want to share? Sean, you're not on mute, so I'm going to ask you.
I'm always happy to share. I don't want to weigh in too much here, but I feel like these things are topics that you should really to when you're interviewing and meeting a company and onboarding with them and just trying to understand what is their culture. We talk a lot about what does customer-centric culture mean. Is that something that only the success leader cares about, or are they talking about that in the executive leadership meetings at the board level, meaning aligned metrics across the company, shared net retention or expansion metrics, shared goals in terms of wanting to see certain traction, during the sales process to determine if there's the right stakeholder buy-in and ensuring those folks are going to come through and be part of onboarding and implementation and things like that. So that's where I would want to start and trying to understand these things, because I've been in organizations where I've found out after the fact that, there's not really much going on here that is truly customer centric. They're just trying to get as much, done as quick as possible, and, no dollars left on the table at the expense of the customer experience. And all of that hardship, which I'm up to the challenge for, because that's why I'm here, but it's falling on the shoulders of customer success. And when an onboarding takes 6 months instead of 3, they're not looking at sales, they're looking at success and onboarding for, why that's happening. And, and truly astute leaders, I think, will realize that, as someone said earlier, success and sales are 2 parts of the customer journey. And even before sales, it's product and marketing, right? What are you building? What problem is it solving? How are you describing that? And are you doing it in a simple fashion such that the CFO understands why we spent this money, so that it's not going to be a extremely difficult conversation when we're starting to prep those, stakeholders for renewal conversations, 6 to 9 months after onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other thing too, is that's pretty common, where sales will try to front load when it ultimately you want to see sort of it's called land and expand for a reason, right? And so if you find that you're getting a lot of retractions, at renewal time, where they, if you say the typical example is like, oh, they sell them 1,000 licenses, if you have a license model, and they only needed 100. Well, not only then will they cut back to 75 or 100, right? But then they will never want to talk to you about licenses again. because or if they do, they'll say, well, I want 10 years of licenses free because I just paid for 1,000, I only needed 100, that sort of thing, right? Like they'll, you end up having to have those kinds of conversations with angry customers, and it costs you money, right? And so things like that. Again, it always comes back to the data and the dollars. That's always where you can make your convincing case. Lynn, anything else you want to share before we go?
I think one thing that's come up a lot, and I think customer success in general, is around like being able to tell a good story and being able to use data. So something like this, where like if sales and customer success aren't aligned, like being able to explain like what is the damage that you're doing, like when you're bringing over bad fit customers, or when we're not giving the right handoff, like then there's a huge disconnect. We don't get the time to value early on, and then we can't renew customers. So I think it's, for every stage of someone in customer success, from being able to tell that in a QBR, how do you use data to tell a story, to being a customer success leader or someone who is having to have those investor and founder level conversations. It's how do you use information to like help make your case and advocate for what you need. So what are those priorities? How do you, again, say, here's the dollars we will lose, or here's what we will gain from putting these things into place. And I think that's such an amazing skill set in any stage, but I think especially when you are the customer success person, having to go tell the CEO what you want. Maybe they don't really know what customer success is. Maybe they've only really had smaller companies. You might have to do a lot of the education on why this is important and why certain things should be there. So being able to tell those stories and have data to back that up, I think is really important.
Great point. Absolutely. That is a great way to end it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. I was so excited for this topic and for Lynn to join us. And I hope that you had at least some time. Think of those breakout sessions as a way to start the conversation, and feel free to continue it by getting together with folks. You can go into the community, chat there, set up LinkedIn meetings. There's also that LinkedIn channel where you can put your LinkedIn there, find other people, connect with them there if you didn't connect with them from today. And I just really hope that you can all connect with each other and continue to learn from each other. And next week is when we're doing CSM and CS leader interviews, and we'll be talking about how to set up a great interview for those roles. So excited to see you, and excited to see you next week, hopefully, and just enjoy having you here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a great
Jan.
week.
Thanks,
guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Take
Jan.
care.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Jen.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.